Hello and welcome to the Saturday Sit Down. I'm Pastor Daryl and I'm joined by
Lady Tammy. Thank you for joining us at Saturday Sit Down at 7 p.m. We're glad to be here, Pastor, with you.
So listen, this is our second go round of the Saturday Sit Down, and we have decided that we were going to continue our discussion on mental health because we just believe that it's just that important.
Yes.
And we're dealing with it, how mental health is affecting the church. And so it's a conversation that needs to be had beyond I think it was 65 minutes that we were on last month. And so we decided to continue that conversation. We're going to be joined tonight by a special guest. He's a mental health specialist. His name is Pastor Lance, and I believe that you are going to be thoroughly impressed with this man and his knowledge. So let's go ahead and bring in Pastor Lance, Lady Tammy, and let's get this conversation on the road.
Right.
So let's bring in Pastor Lance at this time. Pastor Lance, how are you, sir?
Hello?
Yes, Pastor Lance, how are you doing, sir?
Oh, all is well on my end. How about yourself?
Doing great, man. We've been looking forward to this conversation. I tell you what, let's start off by you introducing yourself and telling our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay. My name is Lance Woodley. I'm from Belgrade, Florida. Studied theology, psychology, social work. I'm a very simple guy. I like to hunt, fish, and do normal things that normal people do. But other than that, I'm just a simple guy. I've been pastoring in an associate capacity for about 13 years. Since 2000. I feel like it's been more than that. So it's been about 15, 16 years. Since I left for college in 2005, being in ministry, and then with the seminary after that, then went and pursued my second master's after that, and here I am today.
Gotcha.
All right.
Well,
I'm glad to have you. Glad to see you face to face, Pastor Woodley. I know we've texted and talked through email, but I am glad to meet you and see you face to face. Tonight, we are so glad to have you. We last time in April spoke about PTSD and actually had a guest on about her having the struggles of PTSD, but having some victories also. So we, as a ministry, we're a ministry without walls, but we still have people that watch us on a weekly basis. And so we are wanting to continue the conversation about mental health and the mental health awareness and what the church should be doing and how we can help and improve people's lives that do suffer. So that's why we're here today. So audience, say thank you to Pastor Woodley for taking out his time for us, and we're glad to have him. We sent you some questions, so we're gonna go ahead and start with the questions if you don't mind. We'll go ahead and do that. Okay. So the first question,
hold on.
Go ahead.
Hold on.
Okay.
I know you had the list of questions, but I want to ask this question for myself just to get things started.
Right.
Pastor, my experience has been, I've seen people in the church mishandled because there was a mental health situation, but they were mishandled by being judged as being possessed or being crazy. And my question to get the conversation started off is, how can the church do better in assessing when there's an actual mental health problem or when there's an actual spiritual problem? Because it's not always spiritual.
Yeah, actually, I think that's one of the questions that it's being asked.
Oh, okay, I didn't.
But actually, I could speak to the issue just of mental health, not just within the Black church, but within the Black community. You know, we typically stigmatize going to therapists and counselors because, you know, I've heard it said, that's white people
Yes.
stuff,
Right.
Yes.
and also too, there's a lot of stigma. There's some stigma within the church that the church does not handle mental health well. But I come from the perspective that if the church does or do what the church has historically done, the church can be a safe haven for mental health in general. And what I mean is, looking at the wealth of research within the realm of religious experience, spirituality, neurotheology, and psychology, we see things like if churches, we commit to prayer, teaching prayer, right? Having prayer more frequently, meditation. Those things have positive consequences on the brain. And the church being a communal entity, for people who have traumatic experiences, and if the church becomes a sound entity and communal entity, it provides protective barriers for those who have traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
And even for people who may have more psychiatric issues that, for example, like people who have schizophrenia. There have been some cases where the church has been a proper place to contextualize their, in many ways, hallucinations. And what I mean is schizophrenia and the way that the brain works. Well, the reason I say it can be a proper place for contextualization, I have to be very careful because I'm trading thin lines when it comes to this issue. When there are visions and hearings and an individual who has auditory hallucinations and visual hallucinations, and they have these visions that's connected to their religious experience, the church can be a guiding voice and the safe place for people to actually have those expressions. And a person who's somewhat mystic as myself, when it comes to our faith, I definitely believe that, properly contextualized, we may even understand some insight and provide safety for individuals. Because before the West stigmatized schizophrenia, if you will go into the innermost parts of Africa, in the Congo, or in other indigenous cultures, people who have the prototype for schizophrenia will be seen as seers. And I'm not saying that, we should allow that, we should allow somebody who claims to have a prophetic vision from God to be leaders.
Right.
But because there's a potential, I think, for us to be intermediaries for those individuals, to help them contextualize their visions, especially when it's related to their spiritual experience. I'm a charismatic guy with a charismatic background. So me finding this research was very exciting to me, even in, but that's it. So I can go on a rant about that, but that's kind of my thing.
All right,
So,
Lady Tammy, go right ahead.
Okay, so what you're saying is like the schizophrenia and maybe God's, because oftentimes they say that they hear God speaking to them. How do you get them to separate their illness and actually hearing God's voice, and it not be the illness and it's all mixed up in the middle of it? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, if it's somebody that's saying that, I would not encourage the pastor or any lay members to do anything. I would definitely say, send them to a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or a therapist who has a spiritually oriented training and approach to psychotherapy. Because even with the research, in today, even in the DSM-5, if a hallucination cannot be considered an hallucination or having visions that's related to one's religious orientation cannot be seen necessarily, or should not be seen as psychosis, right? But if the visions are not related to their religious or spiritual ideals, approach to the world, then now it's a conversation about psychosis, right? So yeah, so I have to be careful. I'm being careful in how I approach that because the research
Sure.
is burgeoning, and it's been developed over the past 20 years. So but yeah, but if somebody is saying that, definitely send them to a psychiatrist, psychologist, or a mental health therapist.
So for that person that uh, we may think where there is something going on mental health wise, how do we get beyond, trying to pray it away, trying to cast it out, trying to bind it and say, there's actual medical help that's needed? How do we get, is there a formula? Because I believe, just looking back on some of the things that I have experienced, I believe that there's some embarrassment that comes along with not being able to help that individual. I believe the pastor feels as if they're a failure because they can't help. And that person ends up back outside because they're not given that attention that they need. And we fail. I believe we have failed miserably.
We failed. And that was the second question. How do we recognize someone that is struggling with their mental health?
Yeah.
And how do we help them? That's the other question. So yeah, you're right. We get embarrassed, and then we blame the person that has the condition, and we not take the blame for ourselves. So that's the question.
Yeah. Well, this whole idea of a person with mental health being possessed definitely is, I think, a very narrow perspective when approaching someone who has a mental health disorder, and it kind of definitely demonizes the person. So my first suggestion is to try that every pastor in the 21st century should be trained as a mental health first responder, or have some type of professional training where they're degree, study, and licensed to do therapy to some capacity, although you may not be able to do it in your own church because of HIPAA regulations and other things. But to just have a background to do that, right, would help the congregation a lot better. Because right now, in my generation, I'm a millennial. I think I may be the oldest millennial of my generation, but my generation is starting to really accept and own the fact that many of us struggle with anxiety, PTSD, depression, and believe more than schizophrenia. I think more than PTSD, depression is, I think, a disease that has been demonized by the church, because the idea is, how can you live in the victory of God if you're depressed?
Right.
Correct.
When given the fact that, and as the church has always taught historically, that when we live in a fallen world, right, because of the Adamic corruption, all humanity has this, and to just say that humanity is in this perpetual fallen state, and that our bodies respond to that fallen depravity in certain ways, in different ways.
Right.
Yeah. For you, it may be anxiety. For another person, it may be depression. For another person, it may be schizophrenia. For another person, it may be whatever it may be. So for the church to really deal with this adequately, the church has to, one, like I said, have the clergyman, the pastor, to have him trained to identify. But also, churches need to partner with community-based mental health agencies.
Yes.
And that way, have them come to your church, have them do mental health spotlights and things like that, so that we can normalize struggling with mental health issues. Especially with the past 8 years. With the things that, especially in the African American community, things that we've been seeing on church, whether propagated by media or not, these things in many ways are traumatizing. How many people that when the police gets behind them, they become anxious, right?
Yes.
So, there are ways that we have to approach that. And I think too, from a pastoral or preaching standpoint, right? The prophetic voice has to really speak to the issue of mental health. And, like I said, trauma, anxiety, depression, uh, anger, like all of these things that impede upon us, um, from every perspective, I think we have to be able to speak prophetically to that particular issue,
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
and when I preach, I always have, I approach my sermon not only exegetically, but I have the mental health status of the people who I'm preaching to in mind, right? So I might preach a sermon on trauma and triumph, casting your cares on him, ways to alleviating anxiety, right? Because
Mhm.
my voice, not only do I speak to the older generation, but I speak to the younger generation as well,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
who suffer severely from anxiety and depression. And when I was living in Ohio the past few years, most of the kiddos that I work with, anxiety, depression, right? And
Mhm.
I mean, so yeah. So in my perspective, training clergy, churches building partnerships with mental health agencies, and that could help. Because one of the things that we'll notice that when an issue is it's a serious, it's a mental health issue,
Yeah.
is when they began to affect uh, two or three domains of function. For example, if a person's mental health is, if they are so sad that they're unable to sleep at night, and
Mm-hmm.
they do it for 2 nights, I mean, I'm sorry, 2 weeks in a row, they haven't been able to sleep, right?
Mhm.
They are unable to go to work or walk in their job. They can't work.
Mm-hmm.
They
Right.
can't handle their day-to-day lives
Right.
and how they relate to others, their family and their friends. If they're affected in that to that capacity to where they can't perform in those either of those domains,
Mhm.
then I think the pastor has to, recommend to the family. I think more professional help is
Yeah.
needed. Because
Yes.
and believe it or not, the pastor is the first person that in the Black community, the
Mm-hmm.
pastor is the first person that the members come to. Because old school, it was like, he got a demon,
Yeah.
Right.
and the pastor being that calming voice and say, no, there are some, biological things or some neurological things that's happening,
Mm-hmm.
and that's causing him to feel like this or to behave in such
Yes.
a manner. So, and that can be that voice of solace to those people. So yeah, that's what I think the church could do to better aid those who struggle with struggle with mental health in general. Yeah.
Lady
Okay.
Tammy?
I want to ask you this too. Since we've had COVID, we've been in the middle of a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen an increase with African Americans coming to you for counseling, or maybe some of your other what I want to say, your other professionals that you know? Have you seen
Mhm.
an increase with Black people coming and saying, "Hey, I'm having an issue. I'm struggling with
Mhm.
this."
Now the population that I worked with wasn't necessarily, although I pastored in a predominantly Black neighborhood, but the community that I did mental health therapy for was pretty much mixed, a major Appalachian community. Um,
Oh,
but yeah, so what we saw was an overall Black, white, Hispanic. There's been an increase in depression and anxiety, right?
mhm,
I mean, because you socially isolated, right?
Mm-hmm.
mhm,
And you're stuck at home.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that social element that's beneficial cognitively, right? You don't get that bump of dopamine in the brain or that serotonin that you get when you are
right,
hanging out with people, right? That's why the church
mhm,
is beneficial. So
Mm-hmm.
if the like just to do, like, to speak parenthetically, as a sidebar, um like one of the things I saw churches do during the pandemic was do outside services, parking lot services. That gave people an opportunity to bond, right?
Mhm.
And you get that overall communal aspect of socialization, right? That gives us those happy feelings of seeing somebody, right?
Mhm.
And being able to do that in this pandemic has been monumental, because literally people are literally dying to come to church, because
Mhm.
people and
Everybody.
the same. The rise was ubiquitous among all populations.
Mhm.
Like
Okay.
everybody experienced it. That this isolation has increased anxiety in ways that can't be expressed, because jobs was being
Right.
affected, right?
Right.
People's families, suicide had rose because of small mom and pop businesses shutting down. People trying to realize how they're
Mhm.
going to take care of their family. People start
Right.
buying guns. I started buying guns. So that I mean, that's what happened, because I mean, when you take away somebody's livelihood, then and their way of living, then people are more apt to turn to savagery, right? So that's what everybody. That's why everybody was buying guns and gun-laden communities, right?
Mhm.
So
Yes.
and that's because of the rise in anxiety. That's why people was buying up toilet paper, right? They thought they.
Right.
I don't know the correlation between toilet paper and pandemic. I guess if
Right.
you're gonna
Me
be
neither.
stuck in, you know,
We didn't either. But yeah,
I mean, I guess you're gonna be stuck in the house and you're like, well, I gotta go. I'm gonna
I
have
guess.
toilet paper. But yeah, but there's been an increase overall toward everybody, towards all population
Yeah.
and races, especially the African American community, who does not really talk about it as much, and we're becoming more aware of our mental health issues. We're becoming more
Yes.
vocal about it, but there's still a lot of people, yeah, in our church, in our churches in general, who who ignore their depression
Mhm.
Mhm.
because they feel like people are going to think I'm not saved, and then
Yes.
guess what? They're going to think they're not Christian, right? They're not saved,
Yes.
and then that compounds their depression, and then leads to
Yes.
suicide and other things, substance use, all things like that. So there's been an increase and among almost all symptoms of mental health issues since this pandemic.
Yes. We even actually talked about this during the pandemic. Pastor Daryl and I, were talking about what is the mental health going to be like for health workers, people that are frontline workers in the medical field, people like you. What
Mhm.
is going to be? Who is going to be? How are they going to have an outlet after it's over, or after it kind of calms down? How are they going to? Who are they going to go to without it affecting their professional life or their boss finding out? Things like that. People think about things like that, and the church has often always been the worst persecutor of people that have suffered from depression. My mother, my own mom, has suffered from it, but would she have dared told, my grandmother and my great grandmother and even my great grandmother even had a nervous breakdown, and this was back in the 30s and the 40s when this happened to her. So
Mhm.
they put her in, of course, the hospital, and my grandmother was like 5 years old going to see her mother in this big room with people that were walking around like, either they were drugged or they were talking or hallucinating or whatever. But this is in the 30s and 40s. And I can attest, my great grandmother, she was saved, sanctified, and filled with the Holy Ghost, but she was broken. She had experienced something and it broke her. So
Mhm.
I have seen, mental health in the church and how nobody wants to talk about it, but I know that I personally have experienced it. It would be every 5 years, my great grandmother would write a letter saying that God was going to call her home. Well, at that point, she was depressed. But did we notice that she was depressed? And we're like, oh no, that's just her. But we should have taken more precautions with that. And we did not. So the church has been the culprit for a very long time.
Mhm. Yeah, and especially in the 30s and 40s, psychology was just now developing and just now learning about behaviors and things like that. So I can imagine. A lot of times, they didn't have the technology that we have now
Right.
to see what's happening and what's going on. So
Yes.
So Pastor Lance, I love that you said that there should be some training included for clergy. That sounds wonderful. Are there some tools that we can implement without being trained? What can we do as a pastor, as the parishioners, to keep that person coming? Because most of the time that person ends up going away because, if you're not acting like us, we treat you different. And that's just the truth of it. So what can we do to keep that person coming, even without being trained, without a degree? Or what are
you
some
said coming? You mean coming to church?
Yeah.
Being participating in the Bible?
Yes.
Simple. One, you have to talk about it.
Okay.
You have to normalize it. Tell them that it's okay.
Yeah.
Provide support and outlets, right? If you're not trying, guess what? Get somebody who can do a grief group, right? Somebody who can do a substance abuse group, 12-step program or whatnot, right? And just, create a community around what mental health issue that you want to target, right? Because in Hamilton or in Butler County, Ohio, the biggest thing was substance use. And I think Ohio, well, at least my county was the second highest county to suffer from opioid addiction in the entire state of Ohio. And I think Ohio as a state ranked number, I can't even tell you, but it was among the highest.
Okay.
So to be among the highest ranked in opioid addiction, and then to have the number 2 county in the state that dealt with opioid addiction, right? So it was obvious to either have something to do with opioid addiction because everybody was really overwhelmed. There's only a few facilities that dealt with it, like from a partial hospital approach, right? But there were therapists everywhere. So, by the time I came along, they were trying to get churches to partner, right?
Wow.
And so that's one thing. So with the opioid addiction, of course, you got trauma, got depression, and things that people because typically, I think the number one precursor to opioid addiction in Butler County, or maybe just in Ohio in general, was medication. Like they'll go to the hospital for medication. It was difficult for them to be weaned off of it, and then they develop an addiction like that. That's one. And then just in general, people use substance to self-medicate, right? In many ways.
Right.
So you have many of those factors that goes along. Now, but don't quote me on the number one being transition from hospital, transition from medication to addiction. Now, I could be wrong, but it's been a while since I actually looked at that particular statistic. But I think that's what it was when we learned this when I was studying in grad
now,
school.
did you say that was in Ohio, or are you saying that's in Florida? That was the highest county.
It's Ohio.
No, that's in Ohio. That's in Ohio.
Okay, yeah. Montgomery County, I know, was really high up on the list there in Ohio.
Yeah, and Butler County was number 2.
Yes. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, I knew that and I heard that. But I did notice that even in Florida, it's not as many mental health facilities. The county that we live in, because we live in Florida too. So the county that we live in Bradenton, Florida, which is an hour south of Tampa. Yes. So we even noticed that there's only 2 facilities in this county that actually help with mental health and people that suffer with homelessness and things like that. So it's not even enough professionals in this county to help the population that's here. So people go untreated, people go without medication. And so those people eventually sometimes even go into the church.
Mhm.
And so church is not equipped to handle them. And then the church abuses them or turns them away or turns them off. And then we're still at the same standstill. The church is not helping. And if I remember correctly, that the church is the hospital. And since the church is supposed to be the hospital, we need to be just that. Not just give them spiritual, but also give them the natural side of it and not be ashamed to talk about it. That's my feeling on it. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
I know Pastor probably feels the same way, but you can give your take.
Well, I was just going to say that number, the stats that NEMI gives for the, I don't know, over 3 million people here in Florida, that's actually depressed but don't get the treatment that they need.
Yes.
Then there's 1 in 8 for every ER visit that there's a mental health situation. So, I mean, there's a lot of people falling through the cracks. And as she said, you know, there's not even enough facilities in our area to treat these people properly.
Yeah. I think many communities, many states, the same way. For to understand that Ohio at one point was the Mecca for mental health. Everybody sent their people to Ohio to be treated, especially at least on the East Coast, from what I was understanding. But so with Florida, we definitely need a lot of first responders. You know, but at the same time, pastors need counseling, counselors need counseling, and everybody in the helping profession needs counseling. Nurses needs counseling. Right? Police officers needs counseling, especially police officers with all of the trauma that they've seen. You know, I worked with one police officer back in Ohio. He said he's seen just so many deaths over his 27 years of being a police officer.
Sure.
And that jacks up a man's mind to see, you know, and I remember working as a clinical chaplain at a children's hospital back in Dallas. And one weekend there were like 6 deaths, right? And as a chaplain, you go and you touch those bodies, right? And to touch those bodies, well, we just had, it was in one weekend, one day, it seems like, you know, and go in, take these bodies to the morgue, like to my children. Some of these children were abused, and that messes with you, like that. You're talking about the depravity of humanity. You know, if I had any positivity about humanity at that time, it was taken away. You know, it took some time for me to get to work through those things emotionally. So people who are in the helping profession needs, you know, the pastor, where if many don't believe, many are not Christian, they have their own walk, but those who do need the pastor's spiritual guidance. And then when people are hurting, or regardless of what their religious background is, they want some guidance, you know, to know something outside of them is at least listening and willing, you know, and a lot of people are open. But, you know, I think that the church has to do a 180-degree turn in the way that we deal with people in American context, in our context, just in general, so that we can be more receiving. That people will be more receptive, you know. And I'm of the persuasion that it'll take 6 months of faithfulness to a particular community just to offer the gospel for 3 minutes to one person, right? And sometimes you have to be willing to put in the work. You know, and that's what kind of, we have to be a very work, hands-on oriented people to bring the people in. Like, we got to go into the culture, transform the culture, and we transform the culture by loving the culture. You know, and one thing that Jesus did was when Jesus preached, he didn't preach against the people who needed the help. He preached against the religious. He didn't necessarily preach against stigmatize or go off on the prostitutes. Guess what? He hung out with them and told them this is the kingdom of heaven, right? You know, when he gave his the parable of the banquet, you know, about the banquet master going and inviting everybody from the highways and byways, right? He's calling those who are on the outskirts of society, right, to come in. And you know, this is what the kingdom feast looks like, right? So, you know, we have to be willing to go out. We have to, because I mean, that's really what it means to be Christian. They call Jesus a glutton and glutton and a drunk because he hanged out and supped with the publicans and the sinners. So, you know, Jesus was willing to get dirty. The question is, the church, are we willing to get dirty?
Right. Exactly.
To clean some people up.
I heard you mention, of course, Jesus hung out with the ones that were the outcasts, the ones that weren't liked. His whole thing was he didn't come for the people that had it all together, that thought they had it all together. He came for the sick at heart. He came for the man that was possessed in the cemetery, and all he had to do was say, you know, in the name of Jesus, and he was healed. So you're twofold. You're naturally a mental health therapist. That's your profession. That's your career. Then you're also a pastor. So that means you're spiritual guidance also. So have you seen improvements with clients or patients that have accepted your spiritual advice, but they may not even go to your church, but they've accepted it, and they may even have gotten some victory from their issues or their condition?
Actually, as a matter of fact, I had one case where they were not a client, but they were a member of a former church that I was pastoring at. And one thing that happened was my commitment to encouraging them to pray more often, right? And the thing about it is, now whether they pray or not, I can't do this. Like I can't say that if you pray, this is automatically going to fix your situation. Right. But the idea for people who have anxiety in particular, it is imperative, one, that I tell them that they have to believe, right? And you have to believe that God is listening. And you have to be willing to cast your cares on him. And there are instances where they said, you know, it's a day-to-day thing. It's not one time and fixed. They'll say, yeah, Pastor Lance, I prayed today and I feel better. And this thing happened to me, right? And that's one case. A second case is, you know, people who are depressed. You know, my recommendation is always to be around the community. Force yourself to be around the community. That's where you want to be supported. And guess what happened? They began to notice that their mood begins to improve. But then what happens if they begin to back off? Then that depression and anxiety comes back. So it's never a one-hit fix. It's always something that you have to do continuously. Like if you're going to be in the church, like we have to pray. Like if you're a Christian, you believe that God listening to your prayers, even when you don't. But being willing to pray, that helps. And matter of fact, there's evidence that helps, right? People who struggle with attention, meditation and prayer, that helps. And that has helped people. And sometimes when I'm dealing with people who may not be religious, they call themselves spiritual. That's the new term now. Spiritual. I use less spiritual language and I say, meditate. What do you believe about the world? You know, and then they come up to their conclusion about there being a God, right? And or some people don't say God, people say higher power. That's the thing, right? Right. And then now we can have a conversation about who's listening and what do you want, and can you admit that you're powerless, right, against your condition? And if you are powerless against your condition, then you give room for individuals who are you give room for the miraculous to happen. You know, you invite the will of God, and you have to seek him every day. So even now, in my present context, that works, because right now I am I'm a clinical chaplain for a rehab facility here. So where I have to do this every day, and people come and tell me every day, like I went, like whether it's spiritual issues dealing with unforgiveness, that's also a a good indicator for mental health issues and emotional mood issues as well. So whether it's working through unforgiveness, right? Teaching them a method to deal with that to help them in their progress or process of forgiving. So, and they tell me, okay, this is working. I feel like this is being, I can't say names for confidentiality reasons,
Sure,
but,
sure.
you know,
Right.
but they say that, this has helped me. I feel like I'm free of trying to control this thing, whether it is my depression, whether it is my anxiety, whether it is my addiction, right? In that first step that I have everybody to admit that you are powerless,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
And,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh, no, that's it.
Okay. That was my last question. I have been enlightened, informed, and really, really appreciate the information that you have given and said on tonight. We, our audience, they're gonna love it tonight for what the information that they've gotten tonight. And we are embarking on being that conduit for someone and helping someone and taking some training and getting connected with community resources in other states where other people watch us and not really sure where to go and what to do. So we're gathering that information. And Dr. Lance, do you take
I'm not a doctor yet, so.
client? Oh, okay.
Yeah, not yet.
Not yet, he said.
Not yet. But, like I
Not
said, I just have my
doctor.
master's in theology, most of my
Okay.
research in psychology, and then the last one is mine.
I'm sorry. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm going to call you Pastor Woodley then. Pastor Woodley or Chaplain Woodley. Do you have any suggestions for people in Florida? Since you're in Florida, we have listeners in Florida. Do you have any community resource that we can point them to, or you can say on air that they can either call a 1-800 number or get online and look at the information and get some help?
Hold on, I have to look because I have been here only 1 month. I haven't been reacclimated to this yet. I've only been here 1 month. So I'm not familiar with all the resources. I'm not fully moved here yet because I still got all of my items from Cincinnati. So I haven't familiarized myself with everything, but I'm pretty sure there for depression hotline. Hold on. So I'm looking it up. If you go to, there's a 1-800 number, 1-888-379-6507 at safehelpline.com.
Okay. So everybody that's listening, you hear Dr. Woodley. If you know somebody that needs help, that number is the safehelpline.com. We'll have some other numbers for everyone and some other information in the comments so that they'll know where to go and get help. Again, we are working on some things too, as Winning in Prayer, to get some resources to people in Ohio and people that watch us. So that is our goal, is to help. And we don't want to just do this because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. We want to be, like I said, the conduit on a constant basis. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yes, and I would like to add one more thing. Because of my clinical orientation, like I have to say that we have to look at the whole person, the biopsychospiritual aspect, right? And try not to, we have to, as clergymen, as pastors, and just clergy members in general, we have to look at the person as an integrated whole, right? Thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And if we are able to do that, we are able to approach ministry in a more fuller way. And I think we can do it better, right, than almost any entity. Because if a person is coming to your church, they already have a spiritual awareness to start with, right? You don't have to convince them. So now, and by approaching them as a biopsychosocial, spiritual person, right, we can we can help them achieve wholeness through the Holy Spirit in ways that hasn't been done before.
I like that. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. I really do like that. Pastor, I'm done. If you
Okay.
Pastor,
Well, listen. This has been a great time. Well, we've been looking forward to this, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Pastor, thank you so much for your time. We certainly enjoyed it. We're gonna let you go, and then we'll wrap up. But we just want to say thank you, and we're very appreciative of your time and your expertise. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm glad that you had me
thank
here.
you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow. What?
That was good.
That was powerful.
Yes.
This is everything that I thought it would be. This conversation was so great to me because he gave us answers, some actual how-tos, what we can do to see improvement, what we can do to help these individuals that are dealing with mental health issues. This was an amazing night.
Yes. And I love what he said.
I'm pumped up right now because, the
and I love what he said about the last part about treating the person as a whole.
Yeah.
Not just looking at their condition or their issue, looking at that person as it's a person.
Yes.
It's a human being. It's not outside of its condition.
And that's what we failed at. That's what we have failed at.
Yes. We've looked at the condition and we've looked at their actions. We've never, ever taken the time to give grace to them being a human being, to being a person. Who were they before?
Yes.
Who were they? What made them come to this point? What broke them at that point? So it's our responsibility to look at them as a whole person, not their condition, but their whole person. And that's one of my things that I was getting out of the word. We must give grace.
Yeah.
We have to give grace. We have to give grace no matter what anyway, but we definitely need to give grace when we recognize that someone is suffering from a condition or issue. It's our job. The church is to be the hospital. I say, let's be the hospital, not just to pray for cancer, not just to pray for asthma, not just to pray for blood conditions. Let's pray for the person that is dealing with depression, anxiety. Let's get them some help. Let's not just look at them because, she looks disheveled this Sunday. What's wrong with her? What's wrong with her hair? Or what's wrong with him? Where's his, he's got on the same clothes he had on yesterday or whatever. He's dirty or whatever.
Right.
We need to be paying attention to the whole person, not just their condition, but to the whole person. So I'm thankful for the conversation. Yeah. I loved it. It was great. I think that it's going to be the beginning of something, even with Pastor Woodley involving winning in prayer.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you all for being here tonight. I think it was great.
Yes.
That you experienced Pastor Lance Woodley. I was calling him doctor. He said he wasn't a doctor yet.
Not yet.
But I was calling him a doctor. To me, he was a doctor because he had a little bit more experience than we do. But more experience.
If they would have seen his bio like we saw, you'd been saying doctor too.
Exactly.
But I am thoroughly. I'm happy on tonight because I feel like anybody that watches this can walk away with some tools that they can implement right away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I think it's going to be huge as the church moves forward. That love that we have always said that we have, that love begins to cover.
Yes.
Just because they don't look like or smell like you do, we still need to extend our love. That person that's dealing with the mental health situation, it's no different from that person that just needs to be saved. There's a problem. And the church is in. I love what he said because, I said that the church's ministry can be dirty.
Yes.
We need to not be afraid to roll up our sleeves and get in there and help out. May not look like you think it should look. may not sound like you think it should sound, and again, it may not smell like you think it should smell. But we still should love. So I know on tonight that, like I said, anyone that's going to see this, they're going to get some tools that they can implement right away. Even for the pastor, for the ministerial staff, you can get some tools from this tonight that you can implement right away.
Yes, he said pastors need some form of training, something.
Yes.
Read some books, get some training. Ask somebody to come in from the community that deals with mental health.
Just spiritual.
Yes,
it's not
exactly, because a lot of times, again, like you said, they kind of mix it in sometimes, and you have to figure out which part is the natural that needs the help, and then which part is the godly part. So we need to be trained. We need to know what to look for, and he hit it right on the head. We need to get some training, read some books, have some people come in. Point blank, period. There's nothing else. I mean, there's nothing else to say about that.
I mean, it's just like us. We're not. I don't have a degree. I have a counseling, but I'm not a doctor. So we call in someone with more experience. It doesn't diminish who I am at all. It doesn't diminish, but we call in someone with some expertise so that we can begin to really see some momentum and some traction in an area that has just gone neglected for so long.
Yes. And again, you can give them scripture, but if their comprehension is that, if they're comprehending only their illness, the scripture is not going to help. We need to find someone that's going to help with the brain activity, what's going on in the brain, and what's going on, in their emotions and their feelings. We can give them scripture, that's fine, because that's part of our job as pastors and leaders in the church. But if you see that that's not working, like you said, we need to be saying to the families or to that person, hey, I got somebody that I want you to talk to. And there's a way to handle it. There's not, you don't have to diminish the person. There's always a way to handle it. I did have a few examples of people that in the Bible that dealt with despair and distress and not really sure where to turn and what to do. Just take, for instance, Esther. Esther had to feel the pressure of, for one, she was being bullied by Vashti. Vashti was upset with her. We don't know what was going on in the house, but Vashti was upset because the king called Esther and not her. So Esther was feeling pressure herself. And so how did Esther feel? How did Esther deal with her pressure? Of course, she called Mordecai. They got word to Mordecai. She's telling him, I can't do this. I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to do this. Who knew that, she would she was the one that was chosen to keep the children of Israel from being killed. Right. But she was under pressure. You want to look at John the Baptist. He was under distress all the time. He was preaching the word before Jesus came to be baptized. His life was threatened all the time. And only thing he really had was prayer and the word that he was speaking about who was coming. So there's people in the word that have dealt with pressure, and there's nothing that we deal with that you can't find in the word. And that's the part that the spiritual, we as leaders express to people that are dealing with health conditions and mental issues. We express to them, you're not alone. The Bible is not that ancient that it didn't deal with those. Even Jesus himself dealt with pressure. I mean, when he had to go to the cross, the anxiety, I'm sure it's anxiety. Anxiety is like, I feel, I can't do anything about it, about this feeling that I had. So we need to be gracious and remember that person is a whole person.
Right. Well, listen, we're going to wrap up. Listen, this has been the Saturday Sit Down.
Yes.
We'll tackle tough subjects. I pray that you have gotten something out of the session on tonight. And again, we want to thank Pastor Woodley for his time and his expertise. And so listen, we love you with the love of the Lord.
Yes.
Until next time, we want to pray and ask you to continue winning. And we'll see you next. What's the date for the next one?
June 26th.
June 26th is the next Saturday Sit Down. Tell your
Yes.
friends, your family, your mama, your cousin about the Saturday sit down, and we'll see you next time.
Yes. Keep winning in prayer. Love you.